It seems to me that it is a two-horse race, at least at this juncture in early August, for the Big Ten title. And those two teams are Ohio State, who we just mentioned, and your Oregon Ducks. Oregon new to the conference. I suspect I know how you feel about the demise of the Pac-12, but
Sure.
We are where we are. You are now a Midwesterner through and through. Your West Coast identity has faded with time, unfortunately.
How dare you? That makes
I'm
me
trying
so
to be
sad.
dramatic, Dan. How do you feel about Oregon this year? Give me the lowdown on Oregon.
Can I do the Phil Steele thing?
The Phil.
To understand this year's 2024 Oregon squad, you first have to start out with the Holiday Bowl team from 2008. It was a simpler time. Zach Robinson, Des Bryant, Walter Thurman III.
I have a Steelism in my preview somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, sorry for the quick interruption, but it'd be incredible if you considered subscribing to the Solid Verbal YouTube channel right down below. So I feel great about Oregon. Interestingly enough, right, if you're pairing Oregon and Ohio State, who am I talking about here? With bringing back a number of crazy talented players, adding in a high-profile quarterback, and a coach who is dogged by losing repeatedly to his rival, right?
Yeah.
Am I talking Ryan Day or Dan Lanning?
Yeah.
Exactly. So Oregon's in a great place because I don't think the pressure on Oregon, even with as much as they've done in the portal and NIL, and they themselves have made a big deal of going to the Big Ten, and rightfully so, that there is pressure on Dan Lanning at Oregon, right? He has been a very vocal figure. He's been a very public figure to take this next step. And the pressure is on Oregon to do so, but I don't think, as much as Oregon people hate losing to Washington, Michigan, Ohio State's different. It just is different. So they're in at least a more luxurious place that it's not make or break in that same way. Oregon is stacked on both sides of the ball. They might not have the exact number of All-Americans that Ohio State has the potential to have. I think Oregon's in a better place at quarterback with Dillon Gabriel. I just think he's had more consistent success. The running back room is stacked with Jordan James. Now they had Jay Harris, a D2 running back, but Noah Whittington is back. He got injured early last year. Evan Stewart comes in at receiver. They bring back Tez Johnson, who was a 1,000-yard receiver for them in the slot last year. Speedy dude. Terrence Ferguson, the tight end, who was all-conference caliber last year. He decides to come back for his senior year. Both tackles back. A rotation guy back at center. Guards are one guard is back. They're in a good spot. Depth is there at receiver, skill position. They've got intriguing young guys on offense. Defense is interesting because they basically overhaul the entire secondary. They have a safety back. They might have a cornerback. He's got injured at the end of last season. I'm not sure if he's back in full health. But bringing in the transfers that they did, highlighted by Jabbar Muhammad from Washington, certainly all-conference caliber last year, could be an all-American caliber guy at lockdown corner. They bring in dudes in the secondary. They're deeper there. They've recruited well there. Linebackers should be good but thin. And if there's a point that I'm going to look at, or a couple different points where I'm like, if a guy gets hurt, I know you've mentioned this with Dillon Gabriel. If a guy gets hurt between the two starting linebackers or one of the guards on the offensive line, that's from like, there might be a drop-off we're about to see. There might be dudes picked on and pushed around a little bit at linebacker or the inside of this offensive line. The D-line, they've recruited super deep there. The edge is back. They lose a little bit of beef, but they bring in some beef from Michigan State and Houston. So they're deep pretty much everywhere other than the inside of that offensive line and linebacker. I trust Dan Lanning. He needs to win bigger games, right? We saw it last year with, how he went for it in those high leverage moments against Washington and Seattle. And then the start of the Pac-12 championship game in Vegas was disastrous on offense. Like, they just looked lost. And for a team of this caliber, they can't, if they're looking to, the next step for Oregon is not just making the playoff. It's probably winning a playoff game with what this roster looks like. So they need to be in that Final Four, if not Final Two nationally, to really have a proof of concept moment for Dan Lanning, how they've recruited. And their schedule looks fine, honestly. Like, their biggest game is at home in Autzen. The non-conference portion of their schedule, it's just a different look Oregon State team with where they are in terms of the Pac-2 status. Boise State should be decent, but I just don't think they're of Oregon's caliber. Famous last words, Oregon does not have a good history with Boise State. And honestly, like, they're in a good place. Like, you look across this schedule and it's great. like they have the Washington game at home. I know they have a Friday night game. I think both Purdue and Michigan State are Friday night games. But if they take care of business, which they have done more and more under Dan Lanning, other than those huge games, they miss USC, they miss Penn State. It's pretty good.
Yeah. Well,
so
per our friend Bill Connolly, last year was the best Oregon team ever since he's been doing his SP+.
They led the nation in points per drive offense. They had the most efficient scoring offense in America.
It was a good season. It was a 12-2 season, marked, of course, by those losses to Washington, but won the bowl game.
Yeah.
And then they loaded up, right? They went out, they loaded up, they brought in guys that I think can make that offense better, can make that defense better. It is clearly a hot program right now that has a ton of momentum. The question for me truly is what happens if Dillon Gabriel goes down again, because he's not been the most bulletproof from an injury standpoint over the course of his career. I think Oregon is fine at quarterback.
Yeah.
And whether it's Dante Moore or anybody else,
right,
they will have enough around that quarterback to continue winning and playing at a high level. The truth of the matter is the schedule, most of the teams in the schedule are 7-5, 8-4 at best. There are a couple headliners that I think
Michigan, Wisconsin, a
couple headliners that you can look at and you can say, all right, we know that that's going to be a big game. But beyond that, most of these opponents seem very, very beatable. So again, if I'm looking at Oregon and I see 10.5 over under, I don't know if I'm touching the over under per se, but this is another team that I'm maybe not writing into the playoff in Sharpie, but at least writing them in with a number 2 pencil.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It feels like this is a playoff team to me. I'd be surprised if they aren't there.
I agree. Their November isn't nothing, just because it's at Michigan, Maryland, at Wisconsin, sort of deeper into November, and a bye week before hosting Washington. That's talent. Those are good, if not pretty good, if not very strong teams to finish out the year. But I think they have depth like they have not had. So the danger with Oregon, right? The danger, what makes them dangerous to everybody else is that it's kind of more of the same from last season, and 2 fourth downs go their way, right?
Yeah.
Like a couple of decisions go their way, and it's more of the same. And, it's a great home field advantage at Autzen Stadium for hosting maybe the biggest game of the season nationally when Ohio State visits. And they're in danger to me, it's those two groups that will decide the ceiling of this team, the inside of that offensive line and the linebacking core, because I think the depth is there everywhere else.
Should be one of the better teams in college football.
I think, and Dillon Gabriel's the current Heisman frontrunner.
He should be.
He was about a month ago.
He should be near the top if he's not at the top.
I think he could have a stupid good year. I think he could build on what Bo Nix did. I don't think he's going to be as accurate as Bo Nix, but with how much he loves going down the field, and Bo Nix, if there were one area to nitpick, it was his reticence and accuracy at times going downfield. Dillon Gabriel might not have as strong in terms of pure, what is it in baseball that they call it? The pitching, the ball rotations.
Oh, the spin rate?
The spin rate. His spin rate might not be where Bo Nix's was, but he loves chucking it deep.
Yeah.
It's a big old moon ball, but he loves it. So I think Oregon's going to test a lot of teams speed-wise downfield this year. It'll be interesting.
You've got Oregon over Ohio State. I've got Ohio State over Oregon
Yes.
coming out of the Big Ten.
Yep.